Go out to your garden right now. Walk up to a tomato or currant bush and look at the stem from the very bottom. Do you see them? Those little brown or black creatures running up and down like ants on a highway have a plan, and that plan has been costing you your harvest for years. You've probably done the same thing as everyone else. You poured boiling water straight into the anthill, bought granules for 30 PLN, and sprinkled them around the mound. Maybe you even stomped on the entrance with your foot, thinking that this time it would definitely work. And what happened? A week later, the ants returned to the exact same spot as if nothing had happened. It looked effective, didn't it? You saw dead ants, a destroyed entrance. You felt you did what was necessary, but the colony lived on, somewhere deep underground, and rebuilt itself faster than you could put the kettle down. It's not your fault that this method doesn't work. No one told you the truth because no one makes money off boiling water. Now think about how many times you went back to that garden store for another package. You know the feeling when you buy a product, follow the instructions exactly as written, and the effect lasts for 2 weeks, maybe 3. Then the problem returns and you go back for another bottle because what else can you do when there's nothing better on the shelf? That's exactly the point. There is no conspiracy here, no ill will. It's just business. Someone wrote a label for a product that sells, not for a product that solves the problem once and for all. You don't have access to that second piece of information because that second piece of information costs 5 PLN at the pharmacy and has no TV commercials. Think back to your grandfather's or grandmother's garden. Were there ants there? Probably yes. There were probably aphids too, but were the tomatoes as small as yours are now? Or were they a bit bigger, stronger, healthier? Even though your grandfather didn't buy any chemicals, he just walked around the garden with a cup of coffee and watched. Your grandfather knew something that wasn't written in any store-bought guide because no one paid him for that knowledge. And today I will tell you exactly what happens underground in an anthill. Why do your current methods of fighting ants protect the colony instead of destroying it? And how for 5 PLN from the pharmacy, you can eliminate the entire colony from the inside out without chemicals, without spraying, and without equipment. You will get a specific recipe and a specific step-by-step protocol. 5 actions you can start tomorrow morning. However, there is one thing you need to know before I get to the protocol. There is a mistake that 9 out of 10 people make. A mistake that looks like the right thing to do and causes the method to not work at all or to work for 3 days, after which the ants return stronger. Read to the end because the answer is there. Why what you see near the bait after the first day is not what you think you see. Now calculate how much you spent last season fighting ants and aphids. Ant granules, 80 gray, cost about 25 to 30 PLN. They work temporarily on the surface. Ants avoid them after a few days because they learn new paths, while the colony sits deep down and remains completely unharmed. A good systemic aphid spray costs from 20 to 50 PLN per package. It has to be repeated every 2 weeks because the aphids return stronger when the ladybugs and hoverfly larvae that would normally eat them die alongside them. Add to that the loss in crop yield because even a small colony of aphids on a cucumber or pepper plant can take away several dozen% of the harvest, especially when the aphid transmits plant viruses and the infected plant simply stops bearing fruit. Meanwhile, boric acid at the pharmacy, a small package of 25 to 30 G, costs from 4.99 PLN to 7 PLN. From one package, you can make 20 to 30 portions of bait, which is enough for the entire colony. The total cost of effective elimination is about 5 to 8 PLN per season, without repeating, without personal protective equipment, without gear. Consider whether this makes sense, and then the main question arises. If this knowledge exists, if boric acid has been destroying ant colonies for over 100 years and cost pennies, why hasn't anyone told you about it before? There is an answer, and I understand it might make you angry because it's not dramatic. There is no villain here. It's simply that no one makes money on it, so no one promotes it. That's it. In the 1960s, in the Krakow Voivodeship, at a small experimental farm near Proszowicz, worked a man named Stanisław Majka, an educated gardener, at the time serving as the manager of a fruit tree nursery at the local cooperative. Majka was obsessed with aphids because every year the aphid colonies on the nursery's apple trees grew, And the sprays did their job for 2 weeks, 3 at most, after which the problem returned with double the force. One summer in 1963, Micah noticed that in one part of the nursery, where bags of boric acid used for disinfecting tools were kept, there were noticeably fewer ants, and the aphids on those apple trees were weaker and less numerous because, without ant protection, the ladybugs were doing their job. He began experimenting on an area of 4 areas, placing baits made of sugar and boric acid along the ant trails. For 6 weeks, he recorded the results. After 6 weeks, the ant colony on that piece of the nursery had decreased by over 70%, and the aphid population had dropped by over 50% compared to the previous season without a single spray. Micah wrote a report and submitted it to the cooperative's management. The management put it in a folder. In 1965, Micah was transferred to another unit because 2 nurseries were merged into one. The folder went to the archive, and no one opened it for over 20 years. Micah's neighbor, a certain Mr. Bolswauskusilas, repeated the experiment a year later in his own garden, 25 areas of vegetables and fruits, and achieved exactly the same result. He told everyone about it over the fence. But who listens to a neighbor when a new aphid spray for 30 PLN is being advertised on TV? And a decade later, in the 1970s, scientists from Wageningen University in the Netherlands published similar observations regarding trophobiosis, which is the farming of aphids by ants. They confirmed that eliminating ant colonies with slow-acting baits is the key to permanently reducing aphids. Not an aphid spray that kills the symptom, but anything that breaks the symbiosis from the foundation. Now, I will tell you what really happens when an ant eats your bait and returns to the nest. An ant has a social stomach, not one digestive system like you, but 2 chambers, one for itself, one for the colony. This second chamber is the social crop, an extension of the digestive tract where the forager worker carries liquid food back to the nest. When it returns home, trophallaxis begins, which is the direct mouth-to-mouth transfer of food between individuals. One worker feeds several, and each of them feeds more. Through the entire network of the colony, the poison spreads like a rumor in a small village, where one person said something by the well on Monday, and by Saturday, everyone knows about it, even those who leave the house once a week. This is exactly how it reaches places you will never reach. To the larvae in the deepest chambers, to other workers, to the males, and finally to the queen, who throughout her entire life never leaves the nest herself and is fed exclusively by the workers. The queen of the black garden ant, the one you know from every garden, can live from 16 to even 29 years. Throughout this life, she produces hundreds of thousands of eggs. As long as she lives, the colony lives. Boiling water, granules, stomping on the mound, all of this acts on the surface layers, where at most a dozen or so % of the colony is located, while the queen sits deep down in the safest chamber, surrounded by hundreds of nurse workers and waits. After 3 to 5 days, the colony is fully rebuilt. The only path to the queen leads through the trophallaxis network, through this social stomach, mouth to mouth, through the entire vertical hierarchy of the colony. Do you understand now why boiling water doesn't work? The only poison that will reach there is the one the ants carry themselves. And now ants as farmers. Think about what these ants are actually doing on the stem of your tomato. They aren't walking there for nothing. They are milking aphids, stroking the aphids with their antennae near the abdomen, exactly in this spot. And upon this touch, the aphid secretes drops of honeydew, a sweet liquid rich in sugars, which the ant collects and carries to the nest. This is farming. The ant is the farmer, the aphid is the livestock, and your plant is the pasture that no one pays for except you. In exchange for this sweet liquid, the ants protect the aphids from ladybugs and hoverfly larvae. They move them to new, healthy plants when the old one is already sucked dry. In the winter, they store aphid eggs in the nest to bring them back out onto the plants in the spring. The aphid population under ant protection grows about 40 to 60% faster than without this protection. Because without ants, a single ladybug larva eats dozens of aphids a day, and without protection, the entire aphid colony collapses within a few days. What does this mean for you now? It means that every aphid spray that hasn't touched the ant colony is like watering weeds, because the aphids will return in 3 weeks with fresh eggs from the anthill. There is one mistake. 9 out of 10 people who hear about boric acid and decide to try it make it. The mistake looks like this. You make the bait and think that the more boric acid, the faster it will work, so you add twice as much as needed. Or you place the bait right at the entrance to the anthill. Logical, intuitive, consistent with the principle that more poison means a faster effect. And that is exactly why it doesn't work. At too high a concentration of boric acid, above 2 to 3% in the mixture, the ant dies literally at the bait before it can return to the nest. The poison never reaches trophallaxis, the food transfer network, because the carrier drops dead on the way. The colony sees dead workers near a strange place. A pheromone alarm signal blocks the entrance, and the ants start avoiding that spot. You see dead ants and think the method is working because there are corpses by the bait. But meanwhile, you've only killed the foragers. The colony will replace them in a few days and will never return here again. Exactly the same thing happens when you place the bait right at the entrance to the anthill. The entrance is an alarm zone. Guard ants recognize the threat and block it with pheromones. The bait lies untouched. After 3 days, you see that the ants aren't taking it, and again you think the method is ineffective, even though you really just chose the wrong spot. There are also plants you can plant so that ants give your garden beds a wide berth. This is a proven layer of protection that works differently than bait and complements it from an olfactory and chemical standpoint. Peppermint contains menthol, which irritates the ant's chemical senses on a neurological level. The ant's olfactory receptor is literally overloaded by the intense menthol signal, and the insect avoids the area, looking for a detour. Plant mint near flower beds, at the bases of fruit bushes, and by the entrances to the shed, where ants love to build nests under the threshold. 1 pot per 50 centimeter of the perimeter of the protected area is a reasonable dose. Common tansy, formerly known as bitter wormwood, grows wild on field margins and roadsides. It has yellow button-like flowers and a strong resinous scent that ants avoid with clear reluctance due to the presence of thujone, a substance toxic to insects. You can transplant it from the field margin to your garden or simply gather branches, dry them, and place bundles at the entrances to the shed. Lavender is another plant near which ants slow down and choose a different route, because the linalool and camphor contained in its essential oils disrupt the colony's pheromone communication. Ants leave a pheromone trail along their marching route, and lavender simply scrambles this signal, disorienting the workers. Garlic works through organic sulfur compounds, which ants detect from a distance of several centimeters and instinctively avoid. Plant garlic bulbs every 20-30 centimeters at the bases of fruit trees, where ant trails are the most intense, and you will see that the lines of workers will start to bypass these places. Important note, none of these plants will destroy the colony, poison the queen, or eliminate the problem at its source. They are a physical and chemical barrier that makes it difficult for ants to access your crops and complements the boric acid protocol from a behavioral standpoint. First, the protocol that eliminates the colony, and then the repellent plants as a layer preventing settlement by a new colony from a neighboring plot. Now the protocol, 5 steps. You will start each specific one tomorrow morning. Step 1. Go to the pharmacy and buy boric acid powder. A small package costs from 5 to 7 PLN and will be more than enough for the entire season. Step 2. Prepare the bait by taking 1 tablespoon of sugar, 1 teaspoon of boric acid, and 1 teaspoon of water. Mix it into a thick paste with the consistency of thick honey so that it holds its shape and doesn't spread on the ground. Step 3. Place small portions of this paste, each the size of a match head, no larger, along the ant trails at the bases of bushes and fruit trees in places where you see ant movement, but not right at the entrance to the mound, rather 10 to 15 centimeters away from it. Step 4. Do not touch the bait, do not move it, do not check it every hour, because any disturbance to the scent of the pheromone trail causes the ants to abandon the source and look for another. Give them 3 to 4 days of peaceful work. Step 5. Wait 1 to 2 weeks. During this time, the poison passes through the entire trophallaxis network. It reaches the larvae, all the workers, and the queen. The colony dies from the inside out gradually, without dramatic signals on the outside, without a pile of corpses. The activity around the anthill simply quiets down, and after 2 weeks, the ant trails on the stems of your tomatoes and cucumbers are empty. Imagine that the ant is a farmer and has its livestock hidden deep underground, safe throughout the winter, ready for the new season. And that is exactly why every year you see aphids in the same place on the same plant, as if they were returning with a persistence worthy of a better cause. In the spring, when the soil temperature exceeds 8 to 10 degrees Celsius, the ants pull aphid eggs from the depths of the nest, which they had stored all winter, several dozen centimeters below the surface in special chambers, maintained at a constant humidity and temperature. And this is a moment that no gardener usually sees, because it happens literally underfoot. A worker takes the aphid eggs in its jaws and carries them up outside to a specific chute. Always young, always juicy, always rich in sugars, because the ant knows perfectly well where the aphid will have the best conditions to hatch. This is not a coincidence or a lucky break. This is intentional transport, the result of thousands of years of evolution that gave ants the ability to assess the quality of plant sap based on chemical signals. Young leaves contain proportionally more amino acids and simple sugars than old leaves. And the honeydew produced by aphids feeding on young shoots is sweeter and richer in nutrients. That is exactly why the ant always places its livestock at the very tip of a growing branch, right where the plant invests the most energy. When the eggs hatch after a few days, the tiny aphids immediately start feeding, and the ants become their bodyguards, shepherdesses, and owners all rolled into one. No ladybug will approach this plantation unpunished. In the summer, when the aphid colony is in full bloom, there are a dozen or so ants at a single aphid colony, each milking an aphid at regular intervals, touching its abdomen with their antennae in a precise rhythm to trigger the secretion of honeydew droplets. The ants actively chase away ladybugs, touching them with their antennae and clicking their mandibles. They remove hoverfly larvae that eat aphids and eliminate other predatory insects within a radius of a few centimeters from the colony. In the fall, when the plant begins to die back and the sap in the shoots thickens and becomes depleted of sugars, the ants sense this chemical signal and begin moving the aphids back to the nest. A worker grabs an aphid and carries it underground to a special winter chamber, where the temperature is stable and no frost can reach. The gardener sees in the fall that the aphids have suddenly disappeared and thinks they died off from the first frost, but they are sitting 50 centimeters under your path in warmth and safety, waiting for spring. This cycle has no end. It repeats year after year from the same nest with the same lines of ants running to the same plants. Now it's time for what you can expect day by day. On the first and second day after laying out the bait, you will see intense ant movement around the small portions of paste. The workers will discover the new food source within a dozen or so minutes to a few hours, and then regular transport will begin. This is a good sign, a really good one. Intense movement at the bait means that the colony's social stomach is starting to take in the poison. Do not touch, do not check, do not change the location of the bait for the first 2 days. On the third and fourth day, the number of ants at the bait may drop significantly, and many gardeners think at this point that the bait has stopped working. But this is not true, because such a drop in surface activity is a natural consequence of the colony internally redistributing the poison and some of the workers already being weakened. Between the fifth and seventh day, pay attention to the moisture of the paste, because in a hot, dry summer, the paste can dry out and harden, losing its attractiveness to the ants. If you see that the bait has dried out, you can gently add 1 drop of water directly onto the paste, but absolutely do not move the container. Count how many days from today makes 2 weeks and mark that date on the calendar. If you start tomorrow, in 14 days, you will know if it's working on your specific colony. In the second week, activity at the anthill begins to drop dramatically. You will see fewer workers coming out through the nest entrance in the morning and evening, and right by the entrances, you might find a few dead or half-dead ants. The queen is likely already poisoned by the trophallaxis network at this point, although her death may occur a few days after her last meal, because boric acid works slowly, and that is exactly its strength. If you are dealing with a large multi-year anthill numbering a dozen or so thousand workers, do not increase the concentration of boric acid. Instead, increase the number of bait placement points to 8 to 10 around the entire garden along all active marching trails. Now you have a choice. I'll tell you straight, because that's how we talk at the table. Path A. In the spring, you go to the garden store, you buy granules for 30 PLN. You scatter them by the anthills. For 2 weeks, there is peace. Then the ants return because the queen is alive and continues to lay eggs. You buy an aphid spray for 40 PLN. You apply it every 2 weeks throughout the season. In total, you spend over 100 PLN. In the process, you lose ladybugs and beneficial insects, and next year you start all over again. Path B. You buy boric acid for 7 PLN. You make a bait out of sugar and water according to the recipe you heard a moment ago. You place small portions along the trails. You wait 2 weeks and watch as the colony quiets down, and the ladybugs return to your garden because they finally have something to do. Total cost, 7 PLN, one time. When you remove an ant colony from the inside, you are not removing an enemy from the garden. An ant in a garden without aphids does useful work. It loosens the soil, eats insect carrion, and helps decompose organic matter. This is not a story about ants being bad. This is a story about how when an ant starts farming aphids on your plants, it stops being your ally and becomes someone else's farmer in your field, and you pay for this activity with your crops. When you break this symbiosis, you restore the balance that was there before the aphids. The ladybug returns, the hoverfly larvae return, the natural protection of the plants returns, and your garden begins to defend itself without chemicals, without your money, without your weekly sprayings. The power does not lie in a bottle from the pharmacy for 5 PLN, although the bottle is important. The power lies in understanding what really happens underground, in the anthill, in this mouth-to-mouth chain, in this network through which everything they gather passes. And in the fact that one man in Proshevich in 1963 wrote this down in a report that was forgotten in a folder, but knowledge does not perish along with the folder. Go deep, everything is there. If this story has changed the way you look at ants and aphids in your garden, be sure to subscribe to our channel and leave a thumbs up. We uncover facts and methods that are often forgotten or intentionally overlooked by big business. Let's build a healthier future for our gardens together. Another dose of practical knowledge is coming soon.